There it is.
Good morning and good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Random Trek. I am your faithful captain, Christopher Ingle, and joined as always, straight from the happiness of the Nexus, it's Commander Brennan, the mystical Mar. Brennan, how you doing this week?
Time is the fire in which we burn.
Absolutely. So as Brennan references, today we are taking a look at Star Trek Generations, which is fitting because it's a new year, passing of the torch in this film. But before we get going, I want to make a quick mention. Brennan and I this weekend lost a very close friend to the show, to many podcasts that we've done.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to take a moment to pay respect to Ben and his family. It was a very sudden thing that we did not expect, and this gentleman was a very good friend to many, and just not expecting that. And though we probably would have had him on Random Trek at some point, we never had that opportunity. But I was on one of another podcast with him in the last month, and I know Brennan's done podcasts with him as well. And we want to pay our respects to Ben and his family, and we hope that he is on to the next journey, and is off boldly going where hopefully one day we will all go.
Yeah. So rest in power, Ben Rayner.
Absolutely. But with that, yes, we are taking a look at Star Trek Generations, and as is always, we have a guest with us. Brennan, why don't you tell us a little bit about your guest?
All right. Our guest is a friend of mine. We have been best of friends for 30 years. And this man is probably the reason why I love Star Trek as much as I do. But I'd like, of course, to introduce to you a good friend of mine, Admiral Scott Ferguson. Hello, Scott.
Yo.
Thank you so much for joining us.
No problem.
This is going to be fun.
So Scott, I assume you're a Star Trek fan. You're on a Star Trek podcast. What are your experiences or your memories of Star Trek? Why are you a Star Trek fan? And maybe tell us a little bit about why this movie is important to you.
Well, first of all, my earliest memories of Star Trek were sometime during the second half of the 1980s. My parents or relatives or whatever would sometimes have Star Trek: The Next Generation on TV. And I was kind of aware of it, but didn't really know a great deal what it was about. And then somewhere along the way, I saw a large chunk of Star Trek: The Motion Picture on TV. Not all of it, but more or less the first half of it. So that's kind of how I was introduced to Kirk and Spock and that gang. And but it wasn't until I guess the second half of 1992 that I really became a Trekkie. And that's when I started watching Star Trek: The Next Generation almost full time. It was already, the sixth season was already running at that point, but fortunately, Channel 44 here in the Bay Area ran older episodes of The Next Generation every weeknight. So I had plenty of opportunities to watch Star Trek: The Next Generation. And also but 1994 in some ways was sort of fever pitch Star Trek. That was the year The Next Generation ended. That was also the year that I really got around to watching the first 6 movies. I had previously seen The Undiscovered Country all the way through. But it was in 1994 that I really got around to watching all 6 of them all the way through. Unfortunately, The Wrath of Khan had been butchered because we taped it off of the TV, and it had been heavily room for Khan. But the other 5 I was able to see all the way through. But all 6 of them had been pan and scanned, formatted for a 4:3 aspect ratio.
And for those who are too young to know what that is, let's just say they butchered it.
But Star Trek Generations is a special one for me because that was the first Star Trek movie that I saw in theaters. I mean, so for me, this was a really big deal. And I remember it being a really big deal because it was the next generation on the big screen.
Mm.
And also there were rumors well in advance that Kirk was going to bite the dust in it. And so I understand it opened in November, but I saw it on Christmas Eve in 19. And not only that, but my family and I were vacationing in Utah for Christmas, and we were in Logan, Utah, visiting my cousins. And one of my cousins was, if you can believe it, an even bigger Trekkie than I was at the time. Let's just say that he had an almost life-size cardboard cutout of Captain Picard in his bedroom.
Very nice.
And one time I walked into his bedroom with the light off, and I didn't realize at first who was in there. It looked like there was someone standing in there. Then after a while, I turned the light on, and it was Picard. Go figure.
Pleasant image.
But any road. But yeah, it was Christmas Eve. It was snowing. My cousin and I went to see the movie in theaters, and he had already seen it 3 times.
Oh my word.
And he wasn't bored of it yet. This was his 4th time seeing it, and I later learned that he went on to see it 2 more times in theaters after this. And he made it a point of sitting in the exact same seat in the theater where he had sat the first 3 times he saw it. So yeah.
Nice. I know that like you, this is the first Star Trek movie I saw in theater. I think that some of the images, the saucer crash, one of the most extraordinary images. I remember that I, at the time, was not necessarily the biggest Star Trek fan. I know that my mom was big on Next Gen. I watched along with her, and I was sort of into it. I had seen, I think, Star Trek 4 before this, but then I saw Generations, and this movie will always hold a special place in my heart because I saw it in theater. It's got that nostalgia.
For me, this was a very memorable year for me. I was a 5th grader in elementary school, and we had I don't think it exists anymore, but we had a program called the Safety Patrol, where you had responsible young individuals who would be like crossing guards, right in front of the school, and would help students cross. And you only had the 5th graders, only the most responsible kids could do it. So I was part of this program, and they had a special count. It was district wide for all of the Safety Patrol kids and their families. They could come see Star Trek Generations on the big screen for free.
Wow.
And I, of course, being a Star Trek fan as a kid, this was great. And I asked my dad, I said, Dad, can we go? My dad and I, we never did movies, just he and I. This was the first movie my dad and I ever did by ourselves. And we went and saw it, and we saw people dressed up, in their Starfleet uniforms and, Spock ears. And it was great. I loved it. And it was the first Star Trek movie I ever saw on the big screen. In fact, I think, I'll be honest, I think it was the first of 3 movies, Star Trek movies, that I've seen on the big screen. Other ones I've never got the chance. It's kind of weird, but anyway, it was the first. And I remember that it was a very rainy January when we went and saw it, but it was the biggest theater in town, the hugest kind of the arena setup, and it was just so much fun to see Captain Kirk, to see Picard and all of these characters and all of this on the big screen. It was just this very serendipitous experience for me.
What school district was it?
The Merced City School District. Yep, nice. Right smack dab in the middle. But there were like, at the time, I think there were like 12 or 13 of these things. And then you got to think there are probably a good 10 to 20 kids per school, and then their family members. So, it adds up pretty well. And it was nice that they did that. It was a really nice thing. Anyway, I digress. It was just, I remember that day so well, and the rain and sitting down and the experiences of seeing everybody. And I love this movie from a nostalgic point of view. As a film critic and a fan, however, I'm a little less than happy. But as from a nostalgia point, I love this film very much so. But why don't we get right down to this film? I guess we kind of have our opening thoughts about it already, being that this was our first film, Star Trek film we saw in theaters. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about this plot, and then we'll go into what we like about it. We open up with the christening of the Enterprise B, which is an Excelsior class ship. And it's this big event, capped by John Harriman running the helm, played by Cameron. What is Cameron's name?
Yeah, Alan Rook.
Alan Rook. Thank you. Alan Rook is the captain of the Enterprise.
Rook.
Although at the time I'd never heard of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, so I had no idea who this guy was.
Me too.
And then when I found out about Ferris Bueller's Day Off and found out that Alan Ruck was in that, I remember, oh, he was the Enterprise
Captain Harriman
in Star Trek Generations. So for me, it's the reverse of what it probably was for everyone else.
But the special guests aboard the ship are Scotty, Chekhov, and Captain Kirk himself. And we are getting ready for this quick, they call it a quick, kind of a, not even a shakedown cruise, just kind of a quick jaunt around the solar system, just to test out. And again, this is probably fanfare and all for the papers and the TV and all of that stuff. So, we meet Demora Sulu, the daughter of Hikaru Sulu. So, we get the first inclination that Sulu became a family man. And they go ahead and start out on their journey, leave space dock. But let's play our favorite game now. The Enterprise receives a distress signal, and they're the only ship within range. This we're not drinking on this show, but I'm telling you, this is the drinking game. Like it happens in every time. But the Enterprise is asked to go.
It depends on what you're drinking. If there's no alcohol in it, bring it on.
Yeah, you can drink it all you want.
I don't know. The number of times that this trope comes up, I feel like I need to be drunk to handle it. No. But they go ahead and agree. We have 2 Allurian refugee vessels that are in danger. They are experiencing a temporal anomaly and need help to get out. And for those of us who don't know, Allurian is the species that Guinan is a part of. So they get to this and find this kind of energy ribbon that has the Lakul and the other ship attached. And the Enterprise can't get them out. They can't tractor beam them out because they left space dock without a tractor beam and don't get one until Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Yeah.
Are they
Are
they in Belgium?
I feel like this is the IKEA ship of Starfleet.
Well, it's a reference to an old movie.
But they are doing everything they can to get them out, but the Enterprise B is just not fully equipped to do it. They start beaming them out, but they're limited in how they could beam them out. They don't even have a proper medical crew because, again, they're not getting it until Tuesday. That joke gets old fast. But Scotty works with them and says, hey, we could modulate the deflector to fire a special pulse to break it up so they can escape. We could be able to do that, and we could be able to get out. Cool. In order to do that, they have to go down to deflector control, and Captain Harriman says, I'll go. Captain Kirk, can you take the con? We need an experienced officer. And for a second, Kirk sits in the chair. And we're thinking, yeah, but then he realizes, no, this is your ship. I'll go. And so Harriman stays on the bridge, and Kirk goes down to deflector control to make the modifications. Kirk successfully makes the modifications, but at the last second, the energy ribbon hits the Enterprise full blast, and a section of the hull is lost, including Captain Kirk. And so they are able to escape with a minimal amount of the members of the Lakul, including Guinan. Guinan is aboard, and a scientist, Dr. Tolian Soren. But we at this point fear we've lost Captain Kirk forever. But of course, if you've watched the promo materials for this film, you knew that wasn't the case. We fast forward ahead. What is it? A good 75 years?
78 years. Yeah.
78 years. Yeah. Where the Enterprise D crew, the officers, are celebrating the promotion of Lieutenant Commander Worf, which is awesome. We're glad to see Worf, who for 7 years, well, actually, he was a Lieutenant JG in the first season, and then he became a full lieutenant second season when he took over fully for Tasha. But man was a lieutenant for a long time. Anyway, so he becomes a lieutenant commander. When Picard receives notice from home that something has happened, and we're not quite sure right away what it is, but we get a distress signal from the Amagosa Star Observatory that they're under attack. And so the Enterprise goes to meet up and to find out what's going on. When they get there, Data, Geordi, and Riker beam over. Now, Data is our B plot for this film. Data is still having trouble with humor. So Data decides to finally add the emotion chip that was supposed to be his. And it looks very different from the show, but okay, we'll go with that. Bigger budget. And so they install the chip. And Data begins to tell jokes and to be insufferable. People don't like him. But we discover at the Amagosa Observatory that they were attacked by Romulans. They're not quite sure why. And they come across Dr. Tolian Soren, who was also a researcher on this station. Played
by the great Malcolm McDowell.
Yes, played by Malcolm McDowell. And they beam back to the Enterprise while they investigate what's going on. And of course, Soren meets Picard and basically says, "I need to get back over." And of course, we get his first time quoting about time, which, you know, that can't be a predilection to anything coming, not at all. But we find out from Picard when he has a conversation with Troy that his family back home burned in a fire, including his brother, his sister-in-law, and his nephew Rene, who was very close to, who we met.
I don't think it ever says his sister-in-law.
I believe he said the whole family, all three, had died.
I seem to recall just Robert and Rene, but
I'll have to review that. But either way,
you're right, maybe.
Either way, his family died. The people he cared about the most, especially Rene. And we met these characters in, I believe it was Family in season 4.
Good episode.
It was a very good episode. Good acting job for Jean-Luc. But actually, this is a good acting moment because he breaks down like the loss of his family. This is a pretty serious thing to him, like huge.
And Patrick Stewart is on his A game in this movie.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Even if we may have trouble with the movie, we could say Patrick Stewart is delivering his best here.
Good old Sir Pat Stew, we love him, and he does a pretty good job in all these movies. I think he pushes it as best he can. But Data, Geordi go back over to the observatory and discover a modified probe that has trilithium resin in it. And the concern is that with that resin could theoretically stop fusion from happening, thus destroying something like a star. And Tolian Soren shows up and goes, you know, they're like, what is this? What is this? Here, let me show you. And he attacks Data and Geordi. Data becomes fearful, like paralyzed with fear, afraid that he and Geordi are going to die. And Soren and Geordi are beamed over to a Klingon vessel. They're beamed off a Klingon vessel.
The Duras sisters.
The Duras sisters. Yes.
Always up to no good.
Yep. But Soren does fire one of these probes into the sun of the Amagosa star, thus setting off a chain reaction, destroying the star. So they have to get out of there as fast as possible. And unfortunately, they get Data out of there, but couldn't get Geordi in time, and the Klingon vessel gets away. And so they're trying to figure out what's going on. And what we discover is Guinan finally talks to Picard about Soren and what this is. And it explains the Nexus, that it is this energy ribbon that has the ability to transport you into almost like a pocket universe that is outside of time. And that you could inevitably live forever in your past, your future, your present. You would never age, your dreams. It is pure nirvana, pure bliss. And he wanted to experience this. But she warns Picard. She says, look, if you get caught in the Nexus, you're never going to want to leave.
Yeah, we'll go to that later.
Yeah, but she warns him. She does warn him. So by interpreting the data, they discover that the location of where Soren is going to go to launch one more star, because by destroying the star, you affect the gravity field of an entire star system. And when you do that, it affects the shift of things in the area, including the Nexus. So if this other star is attacked, the Viridian star, then the Nexus will come perfectly in line with Viridian 3 and be able to take him to the Nexus, into the Nexus. That's what his goal is.
And we never learn what Soren wants to find in the Nexus.
That's true. That is true. Meanwhile, the Duras sisters try to get some information from Geordi. I don't know why. It doesn't make much sense. It's just Geordi getting kidnapped again. But they play with his visor and give him his visor back. When they reach Viridian 3, the Klingon ship is cloaked, and they kind of sent out a general hail going, hey, we know you're there. Give us back our engineer and we'll talk. And we, of course, discover the Duras sisters. And they're like, why would we do that? We've got a perfectly good hostage here. What are you going to do? And Picard says, here's the deal. Take me as a hostage, but send me down to talk with Soren first. And they're like, hey, we got a captain hostage. We'll take that. And of course, the Duras sisters have history with Picard. So they willingly do that, and Geordi is sent over. But what they don't know is that Geordi's visor has been turned into a camera. So that way the Duras sisters can watch everything that Geordi watches. And so Picard is sent down to conversate with Soren. And he tries to convince Soren, please don't do this. Of course, Soren doesn't want to. But Picard, being clever, there's a giant force field around this area. So that way Picard can't get through. But Picard does discover a gap in the force field and tries to make his way through, which he does, and to stop Soren. Unfortunately, he fails, and Soren launches a missile into the Viridian star, succeeding in bringing the Nexus his way. Meanwhile, Geordi gets back on the ship. He's checked out by Crusher, says he's okay. Eventually, Geordi makes his way into engineering, where the Duras sisters see the shield frequency codes for the Enterprise, which that means if they fire weapons on them, they can catch them off guard and destroy the Enterprise. And so they begin firing on the Enterprise.
Coolant leak in the reactor.
Yep. And they cause, they pretty much cripple the Enterprise and cause an unstoppable chain reaction to where we're going to have a core breach. It's going to happen. Data, on the other hand, at the last minute realizes, and they work with Worf, that if they send a small pulse back at the ship, they can trigger the cloaking device, which would lower its shields, and they could fire back, giving them 1 moment. And it's only a Klingon bird of prey, so the Enterprise D could easily do this, which they do. They fire it back and destroy the Duras sisters, which that explosion looks eerily familiar, doesn't it, Brennan? Where we see that before? We'll talk about it.
I wonder.
But the damage is catastrophic, and the warp core is going to blow. So they separate the saucer section, get everybody into the saucer, and try and get away.
Getting to see that on the big screen was so cool.
They try to get away, but the explosion from the star drive causes damage to the saucer section, and the saucer section goes down into the atmosphere of Viridian 3, and they have to land on the planet safely in order for everyone to survive. But
Arguably one of the greatest crashes in all of film.
we'll get to that. We're going to talk about that crash.
Oh yeah.
But the Nexus happens and it wipes out the entire star system. But Soren and Picard are sent into the Nexus. Picard, his fantasy is to have children and a family, and Renee is alive, and everybody's there, and it's
At Christmas.
wonderful at Christmas. This is a Christmas movie officially now. But everyone's okay, and it's all great. But Picard realizes when looking at a Christmas ornament that this isn't right. This isn't real. And he gets ready to leave it. And when he goes to the other room, he finds, by the way, there's a carousel in Picard's house.
Oh yeah.
That is the coolest thing. Why was he not my dad when I was a kid? That would be the coolest thing. But on it is Guinan. And he says, Guinan, why are you here? She's like, I'm an echo. I'm not actually here, but I can help you. You need to go, you can go anywhere you want, but if you could, what would you do? And he's like, I've got to go back and stop Soren. She's like, but then the same thing will happen again. What do you do? He's like, I need help. Can you come with me? She's like, no, I can't do it, but I know somebody else. And from his perspective, he just got here. And we get our first look at Captain James Tiberius Kirk chopping wood. Chopping wood. Crossover we've waited our entire lives for, of Captain Picard meeting Captain James T. Kirk.
Making breakfast.
Yeah, Kirk initially is reticent. The allure of the Nexus is pretty good because now he can live and do all the things he ever wanted to do that he never did. And Picard convinces him, though, that, look, none of this is real. I need your help. We need to go back and do something that matters. Otherwise, countless number of lives will die. I need your help. And he says, who am I to argue with the captain of the Enterprise? And so they go off together to Viridian 3 for a showdown with Soren one more time. And this time...
it would not be a Star Trek film involving Kirk without some old-fashioned fisticuffs.
We do get some fisticuffs and some Kirk Fu. Get a little Kirk Fu in there.
Oh, yeah.
But Kirk takes on Dr. Soren. But unfortunately, Soren catches him off guard, and the bridge that he was on collapses, resulting in him falling. And we'll get to him in a minute. Picard makes it to the console, but the console is locked out. He can't disarm it. So what he does is he makes it so the missile is locked to the base, and when it won't fire. If it ignites, it's going to blow up right there and not go after the sun. So it seems, at first Soren thinks he's defeated Picard and Kirk, and as he goes to have the thing launched, he realizes what happens, and he's blown up and stopped.
Including one of those great villain zoom in. Like, oh no.
But Picard quickly sees that Kirk is underneath all this metal and rock, and he goes down and he's like, hold on, I'll save you, I'll help you. And he's like, no, this was fun.
It was fun.
It was fun. Oh my.
Yep.
He dies. And Picard buries him on top of the mountain in a very heart emotional thing. I liked that moment. And then Picard is rescued because, remember, the Enterprise D saucer section is on the other side of this planet. And so they rescue him. And we get cleanup. We begin to see the cleanup of the Enterprise D. Data is reunited with Spot. That was the reunion we really wanted. It wasn't Kirk and Picard. It was Spot and Data.
Oh yeah.
But basically, we get the cockiness of Riker.
And Picard giving us the moral of the story.
Yes, time is an ally who walks beside us. And of course, Riker, one of my favorite lines is, "Speak for yourself, sir. I plan to live forever." And if there's anyone I would expect to live forever, it's probably Riker.
It's William Thaddeus Riker.
But yeah, and then that ends it. That ends the movie right there. They go off, and that's pretty much it. So, gentlemen, What do we like about this film?
I'll let you go first, Scott.
Well, first of all, I think I have some additional insight into this movie because I've also read the novelization.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And the novelization, of course, adds additional details. Scenes that aren't even in the movie, scenes that may have been planned to be in the movie but didn't make the final cut. And also really getting inside the characters' heads in greater detail than what you can do in a movie. For example, in the novelization, there's a scene on board the Excelsior where Sulu and Janice Rand find out that Kirk has apparently died.
Interesting.
And then also, the novelization also, if I remember correctly, gives a little more insight into why Soren wanted to get into the Nexus and what he was hoping to find there. I think he wanted to be reunited with his dead family.
Yeah, because they were killed by the Borg.
Yeah.
That would make sense. That would definitely make sense.
And it also, I remember this one part that really gets inside his head where he realizes, where he sees Kirk and he just wonders, how is Kirk here? Then he realizes, wait, I must have succeeded in getting into the Nexus and everything, and then they came back to try to stop me. Because Kirk must have been in the Nexus, and Picard must have gotten into the Nexus too, and they've come back out of the Nexus to try to stop me. And rather significantly, it also gets inside his head, in Soren's head, in the moment where he climbs up onto the missile thing, finds that the locking clamps have been engaged, and says that he could have thrown himself free. He had a few seconds in which he could have jumped to safety before the missile blew up, but he chose to stay there because he'd been trying. So it's just interesting that he'd been trying to outrun death all his life, and yet when he found that he had no options left, he chose to face death head on.
It's one of the things in this movie that I do like is that Soren is a profound villain. He's very interesting here when you get this idea of and this theme of chasing mortality and immortality, and accepting your mortality after a certain point. You've got to be able to accept it, which is something ironic we talked about with Kirk many times. Kirk in Star Trek 2, I Feel Young, Kirk not wanting to let things end in Star Trek 6, Star Trek 5, I Need My Pain, the growth arcs that we have of him and him
Second
really
Star to the Right and Straight Until Morning.
Yeah. It's really interesting to me that we get this with Picard much more than we do Kirk. But Soren, in that respect, becomes a very mysterious and interesting villain for that. It's not he himself. We are chasing time. That is what we are chasing. We are chasing the shoulda, coulda, woulda, the wants, the dreams, the hopes. That's what we're chasing. That's what we're fighting here. And I really like that aspect of it. And Malcolm McDowell's performance is very cryptic and interesting because I don't find him to be a threatening villain in any way, but that's not a negative.
There's that look in his eyes that only Malcolm McDowell could do.
Yeah, no,
that almost crazy, obsessive.
I enjoy him, and as a scientist,
eyes, yes.
I buy him as the mad scientist. I really like him as the mad scientist, willing to go. He almost reminds me of like a Victor Frankenstein type here, if you think about it. And the efforts that he goes to wanting to succeed in his work, very reminiscent of Victor Frankenstein in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and the lengths he was willing to go to prove his theories right. That he could do what he would do despite the consequences. And I think Soren was at that point too. He was ready to prove himself right, that he could do this and get back where he wanted to be. And he's the first Elurian, well, he's only the second Elurian we've ever met, but he's so opposite of Guinan. Guinan has said it before, we are listeners, but he doesn't like that title. He doesn't. Go ahead.
So he does try.
If I may correct you,
He
in the
does
scene where
try. Mhm.
in the scene where he's torturing Geordi, he acknowledges that he's a really good listener, and he does in fact take the time to really listen to what
But
other characters have to say about things. He listens to Picard,
But
and
he
it's
just
not
doesn't.
it's
he
not the
just
basis of what the Elorian species does. He may use the abilities of listening that the Elorians do, but while Guinan and her people are they are explorers, they travel, they listen. He doesn't want to do that. He
or
may be good at listening, but
yeah, he listens and he considers what Picard has to say, but then rejects it.
Yeah.
I think that the idea here is that Guinan is the selfless Elorian,
Mhm.
while Soren is the selfish Elorian.
Yeah.
They're very simple, but I think they're polar opposites.
Guinan makes a better counselor than Counselor Troy.
That's why I picked her, Brennan.
I think that's why I picked her last week. Yes.
If I may digress a little bit,
Sure.
Certainly.
the other night, my parents and I were watching an old movie called "Oh Henry's Full House."
Mm.
It's what's called an anthology movie, where it's not one big
It's several
story.
stories. Yeah.
It's several stories,
Mhm.
like in the movie Fantasia, for example, with
Mhm.
several shorter segments. And but the unifying theme in this case was that they were all based on stories by O. Henry. And the
Mhm.
final story covered in the movie was The Gift of the Magi.
Mhm.
Ah.
And if you're familiar with that, but there's one scene at the beginning of that segment where there's a sign set up next to a Santa Claus, like the Salvation Army kind of thing,
Mhm.
where he's ringing the bell for donations.
Mhm.
And there's a sign on there next to him that says something to the effect of, "It's better to give than to receive."
Mhm.
So I just
Quoting
thought of that
quoting
when
Acts chapter 5. Yeah.
and I just thought of that when you mentioned how Guinan is the selfless,
Mm.
Mhm.
whereas
She's the
um,
giver.
yeah,
Soren is the I want.
But it still makes him a compelling villain in his own right.
He's different than like Khan or like Chang. A different kind of villain, but still effective.
And when you add to this our knowledge later of the Borg, I mean, he talks about the Borg, but we've learned a lot more sense about that connection with what happened to the Elorians. It makes much more sense. And then the fact that for him, not only did the Borg are the refugees from their own world and they're what's left, but only a percentage of them survived getting their first encounter with the Nexus. So, like, this is a man who, again, is facing mortality really heavily and is fighting that. I tell you, him and Kirk would get along really well.
until
I
they
think
Yeah, good.
I enjoyed the score of the movie. Let's
Mm.
point that out by who composed the score, Scott?
Dennis McCarthy.
Dennis McCarthy, you did a lot of the stuff on the show.
Yeah, and McCarthy said years later that something to the effect of Jerry Goldsmith had other commitments or something.
Yeah, but I really think that McCarthy did a really good job with the score. I do like to listen to the score on its own.
Mm-hmm.
I think the jumping the Radine theme is absolutely gorgeous. I think that the music in the opening scene when the bottle of Dom Carnell is floating through the space, that's got that very mysterious quality.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the music here is great. The movie looks terrific. It is so cool to see Next Gen on the big screen.
Mm-hmm.
The Enterprise B looks amazing. The Excelsior class is probably my favorite class. Oh, Starship. I also really enjoyed, I mean, the saucer crash.
Mm.
I mean, what else can we say? But that is one of the most amazing special effects sequences that I can think of. Which I really enjoy. And then again, Patrick Stewart is getting his A game. really delivering a terrific performance. I think that there are a lot of things to like about this movie. Some of its commentary on time and things like that is very interesting. There are other things that we'll get to in a minute, but I do think that this movie, even though it is one of the odd ones, and the odd films have somewhat of a bad reputation, this, I think, isn't really that bad. And I think that this will always stay with me because this is a formative film in my childhood. And I think that I will always love it because of that, despite its flaws.
A lot of the issues in this film, and we'll get into that shortly, but a lot of this comes because it is this intermediary point. The series has ended. They knew they wanted to do a movie, but they were kind of really moving on. They weren't going to do much else with the next gen after this point other than the movies. They really started their focus and their push creatively into DS9 and into development of Voyager. So it's really interesting when you look at this film that there are some things that with the trained Trek eye, we could definitely see some shortcuts in budgeting and how that affected things. The sets are slightly different. The bridge actually is built slightly different. Why is that? Unfortunately, they had already tore down the sets from the show, so they didn't have a lot of the sets, so they had to recreate things.
Or had they not?
They didn't?
No, the bridge set that we're seeing in Generations is the same set that we saw on the TV show, but
it's a wider and maybe because I was watching a documentary that they actually redid it and made the whole thing wider because of the cinematic feel.
Well, maybe they did adjust the set somewhat because obviously they did make a number of adjustments to the set. They added more stations along the sides of the bridge. They elevated the chair platform and everything, and they gave Worf a chair to sit in.
Oh yeah, I did notice that this time.
But
finally, after 7 years of standing,
so it's possible that they may have adjusted the width of the set a little bit, but it's the same set that we've been seeing because they really didn't have time to build an entirely new set because Star Trek Generations actually started filming while All Good Things, the series finale of The Next Generation, was still shooting.
But you're also dealing, even though it's Paramount, you're dealing with two entirely different divisions between television and between the television and movies. And the one thing I do know with Star Trek is that although they got better at it, they did get a lot better at it as time goes along. They did try to reuse things a lot of times, but there were some things that just didn't translate, that just didn't make that cinematic feel in how they were built. Some things like the corridors, sick bay, the bridge, I guess you could, but there were so many other things that just didn't work. Quarters, for example, I know they rebuilt the quarters from scratch. That I do, because we never saw quarters the way they did them in the movie or in the show. But the other thing too is costuming. Costuming had an issue. I guess some of the uniforms. Go ahead, Scott.
Well, what happened was they had designed new uniforms specifically for Generations. They looked similar to the ones from the Next Generation TV show, but there were some different details. But for whatever, and they actually got to the point where they actually made the action figures with these new uniform designs. But for whatever reason, they decided at the last minute to scrap that new uniform design for the movie. And instead, they had the cast wear a mix of their familiar Next Generation uniforms and Deep Space Nine uniforms. Patrick Stewart and Brent Spiner had new Deep Space Nine style uniforms fitted specifically for them, but Jonathan Frakes and LeVar Burton had to borrow the uniforms worn by Avery Brooks and Callum Meaney on Deep Space Nine, and they didn't fit them particularly well.
You can tell. You kind of can't tell. I feel bad for Riker, by the way. Feel real bad for him when you look at him. He looks awkward. But it's these little things that you get into it that kind of affect the production of this. And Brennan, the one you love, the saucer crash.
Mhm.
I'm not a fan of the saucer crash.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And I don't want to entirely blame it on 1994. I don't. Because, you know, CG technology, while we have it, clearly we have it, is still not as readily used as it is today. It's not. And I have a feeling that
It's
shot
the model work that's really the
It
good
is-
stuff.
You know, I and that's the thing though, when I look at it, a good model work, you don't know it's model work. Good model work, you don't know it's model work. When they're crashing into it and I'm looking into it, all I could imagine in my head was like this set wide landscape. And I could imagine them planting trees. Like for a moment, it took it out for me. And I wonder to myself, could they have done that in CG? Even mid-90s CG, could they have done that crash in CG?
Well,
Mm,
I heard that there are some shots in the movie that did use computer generated imagery, even for some of the ship work.
The crash itself, I know for that. This I do know a fact because I remember watching a how-to special on this. I used to watch behind the scenes making when I was a kid. Like they'd have snippets of scenes and how did they do that? And so they show this, and basically the Enterprise D, the saucer, they had it on a wire, and they did have a large, basically set.
Actually, it wasn't a wire. It was more like a support thing. Like I guess it's a crane or I don't know.
I call it a wire because it's a guided run to give it that sense of speed.
But it was a 12-foot wide model though, and for the shots of just the front of the saucer where it comes to a stop right in front of the camera, they built a much larger section of the model so that they could get more detail and actually try to overcome the issues that you're describing here.
Yeah, it just takes me out of it for a little bit when I look at the setting and I can kind of tell it's a model. Like, and like I said, I've seen good model work. You can't tell it's model work. It's very impressive.
I will say this though, it's far more impressive than what they did in the original series.
True.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yep. Very true.
That's very true. But it is still pretty good. They reused, I made mention to it, they reused the destruction of the bird of prey from 6. Exactly the same shots.
Yeah.
They just added a slight filter. There's a slight filter to it to make it a little bit different, but not much. You can kind of tell.
To change the color grading a bit.
Yeah.
Another thing is that wasn't the only piece of stock footage in the movie. For the part where the saucer separation begins, for the first angle, where it's underneath the Enterprise as the saucer separation begins, that shot is actually from Encounter at Farpoint. They just cropped the aspect ratio in order to fit,
because it looks pretty good on the big screen.
I mean, for that first shot, they didn't see any need to refilm that one shot, so they just reused it from Encounter at Farpoint and just cropped it to match the aspect ratio of the rest of the movie. Then the next shot, where the camera's behind the Enterprise, and you can see the battle damage on the back of the star drive section as the saucer gets clear and starts pulling away, that was newly shot.
Nice. So, I think we now segue into the more difficult part of the discussion.
Yeah.
What we didn't.
Before we get to that, I'd kind of like to say a few more things about what I like.
Absolutely. Go for it.
Go ahead.
Well, I was watching the movie with my dad, and for the part where Picard is going through the photo album, it's mentioned how much family history matters to him. Now, as you may or may not be aware, I'm a member of the same church as Brennan, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yep.
And family history is very important to us.
Big deal. Big deal.
And my dad specifically mentioned the family history bit with Picard, genealogy. It's just something that's really important to us because um, it's just really helps us connect with our ancestors and our descendants. I mean, families, we believe that families are forever. And so bringing that perspective to this, even though Gene Roddenberry was pretty much the polar opposite of that, he was an atheist and that sort of thing. I just feel like Picard wants something eternal here. And the Nexus kind of is a tempting offer, but it's not real immortality. Whereas, well, anyway, we just noted that family history was just really important to Picard, and that just resonated with us personally.
And I totally respect that. And that's one of the things with Picard that I love, is that it did build on things that we set forth in the show, which I really like. And that's why I mentioned family. Like, we set forth already his connection with his family and how important that was. And so the revelation that his family had died in a fire of all things. And he makes reference to that, like a fire, almost like we could change the weather, we can jump. He didn't say these things, but I can imagine the feelings going through his mind. We could do so many things, and we can't stop a fire. My family, you know, there's a helplessness. He's far away from his family too.
Incidentally, originally in the script, it was going to find out that his brother had died of a heart attack.
Oh, interesting.
It's so much more dramatic than when you have his nephew die.
Renee, yeah, very sad.
That's, I mean,
and Patrick Stewart just sells it so well.
Oh yeah, he knows what he's doing 100%.
There also, we could probably talk about this as we talk about what we don't like about the movie, but I just like how
we're at that point anyway.
So. We're getting there.
It's just that I like how the movie is set up as a series of puzzles. But maybe we can get into what we didn't like about it. And
well, you know what? Yeah, one of the last things that I did like, the stellar cartography set. I know that sounds silly, but is that not just an IMAX screen? I mean, I know not realistically it's but that's just what that reminds me of, is a giant IMAX screen. Which obviously is so much more common now. I don't know how common, or if IMAX was around in 1994, but
IMAX has been around since the early 1970s.
Okay. But still now, I mean, obviously, you know, any town, if they put the effort, could put an IMAX set. It's much more available now than it was still. And I just love that set. I love that set and just that giant computer screen. I always wanted to play in stellar cartography and just look at maps. But I'm a map nerd. I like this kind of thing. But I like that set. It was a new set, something we hadn't seen in the show. I really
saw stellar cartography in the show, but it wasn't that.
Not like that.
Yeah, not as fancy, no.
And also they used two different techniques to bring the map screens to life. They actually posted physically printed star charts onto the screen for shots where nothing was going to be animated, where it was just going to sit there. It helped. Doing it that way at that time helped reduce the visual effects cost. And they used, and then they replaced those printed star charts with a blue screen for shots where they were going to need to have the charts animated. So it was kind of a bit of both in that scene.
It was really cool. That's what it was.
I just think it's great technology. And again, this is something that is much more common today. You know, we're 20 years later, but I think it's still more common today than it was.
30.
Yeah, or 30 years, yeah. But still, I love it. It's one of the things I do like. But getting into things that we don't like, let's talk about Data.
Data.
Oh boy. I think that Brent Spiner overall does a good job. I think that some of the humorous moments do get a little old really quick. I think.
I think that the jokes that he says during the scene where he and Geordi are on the Amargosa space station, investigating the trilithium, I think those are fine in the context of what's going on there. Data's supposed to be getting progressively annoying in that scene until it builds to a meltdown.
Mm-hmm.
So there, I think it's dramatically all right. But then after that, during the Klingon battle and afterwards, the jokes probably get a little over the top.
Except for him saying the S word during the crash.
Right.
I
mean,
wasn't expected.
That was
That was also my first swear word in a movie ever in a theater.
Yeah. Yeah, mine too, probably.
But I get why it's there. I get it. And let's face it, if you're in a ship and it's gonna crashing and you're head first watching that, you might say that too.
Yeah.
Just might. So it was appropriate. I kind of got why it was there.
But yeah, a lot of the other humor is, yeah.
It's here's the thing. Brent Spiner is the kind of guy that does character acting really well. Because he was doing, sitcoms and TV shows and stuff before,
and Broadway musicals.
Yeah, this is a guy who knows what he's doing.
He's a good singer.
He's very good at it. Absolutely. Blue skies.
Mm-hmm.
It just felt overdone. It felt like the director said, "Hey, Brent, go nuts." It really felt like that. Brent, go nuts.
I think there's one. Go ahead.
No, and I don't know. Maybe those were his.
No, it is quite scary when he has that malfunction.
It kind of does.
That's actually kind of a scary moment.
I get it. I get why. And the thing is that he's experiencing emotions all at once. He never has. And that's a lot. And I can understand that. And as someone who is on the autism spectrum and has trouble with identifying and understanding emotion, like I know I feel them, but comprehending them and processing them is very difficult for me.
I can relate to the idea of having so much input all at once.
Yeah,
and
me too.
A little trouble dealing with it because I have ADHD. And so I do find that it's sometimes hard for me to stay focused and have to deal with so much input all at once. So yeah, I that.
Yeah, so I buy how he was going through it, but from an acting standpoint, I think it was overdone. And it didn't know when to stop. And I will say I don't mind him. I don't mind him in the S word. I don't mind that. That makes sense. The parts where it really got to me were the
fist pump,
little life.
Yeah, scanning for life forms.
Yeah, I do not like the little life. I'm like, that is stupid. Come on. I get why you did that. You're breaking it up, a little levity, and I understand. Or yes, you have
a good idea, sir.
Yes, good idea, sir. Great idea, sir. Shut up and just do it, Data. I don't like those. But let's bounce it right back in the end when he finds Spot. That's genuinely touching.
Yeah, that is.
I like that, and it makes sense. And it
got me crying last time I saw it.
Yeah, it's just when they're just wanting to show what the chip is doing, and there's no direction to it, it's really frustrating. And unfortunately, when they're in the Amargosa Observatory and when he's on the bridge, those two times, it doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
Incidentally, Brent Spiner hates cats.
Yes, and particularly the cat that plays Spot.
And he didn't, and for that scene at the end, he wanted to change it from the cat Spot to maybe finding Geordi and finding that Geordi was alive after the crash.
That would have been something.
But they went with the cat because it also reinforces the idea of family.
Yeah, exactly.
Because Spot was Data's family.
Yeah. I mean, that's what the movie really is, a lot of family themes. I think another, for me, one thing that I don't like, and it's not a major criticism, the plot doesn't make sense in certain parts. I
Mhm,
think the whole thing with, well, I guess it does make sense where they're in the Nexus,
mhm,
the Enterprise gets destroyed,
yeah.
then they leave the Nexus, so I guess they go back in time. It's a little confusing, I think, in terms of that, and also I think that Picard deciding to leave the Nexus, it was too easy of a decision.
Mhm.
Diamond had told him you won't want to leave.
Mhm.
So he wanted to leave pretty quick once he figured things out. It would have been nice to see more of he's really torn about
Mhm.
leaving.
Well, I was listening to the audio commentary
And the
today.
same thing about Kirk.
I was listening to the audio commentary today, and one of the writers, Brannon Braga,
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Brannon Braga,
Yeah.
said that one thing that always bugged him about the Nexus scene, well, he just felt that the Nexus stuff was just there was just something that always bugged him about it. Even though he helped write it,
Mm-hmm.
he just felt that the idea, the underlying idea behind it is great, but there was just something about the Nexus scene that kind of bugged him. Like maybe it could
It
have been better. Well,
it
I
also
think,
doesn't make sense to me about all the work that Soren does, get the Nexus to come to him, and they do try to explain it
mhm,
in the movie, but if Kirk ended up in the Nexus when his ship basically crashed into it,
mhm.
how come Soren couldn't just do that? And I know the Data's like, well, if he
Well, I
tried to
think,
do that, his ship would be destroyed, but maybe there is an explanation. I
well,
don't know. What do you think, Scott? Do you think there's an
I,
explanation?
I don't know if they made it clear enough, but my take is maybe there was just too great a risk of the ship blowing up before he could get into the Nexus.
Ah, I see. Yeah.
Whereas,
So it is a little bit confusing.
whereas by getting the Nexus to come to Viridian 3, I guess it was just a smoother transition.
Yeah. I don't
I
know.
don't know.
It's a little bit complicated. It's just
If to me, if Picard is a smart man,
Mhm.
why would you want to go back to the exact place where you're at a disadvantage?
oh, that's true.
Wouldn't
That's
it have
true.
been smarter to have gone, okay, let's go back in time and stop Soren from going and setting off the Armagosa star in the first place?
Well,
That's
the
one of the
writers,
great things about time travel.
the writers actually mentioned that in the commentary, and so
Yeah.
they know it's an issue, but they have no good explanation for that.
I guess it was
They
just
just
what the
don't have an answer.
story needed. It's kind of what
It's
they needed, I guess, with the
they
story.
wanted, I guarantee you, they were sitting there going, we need a climactic on the ground, and we needed an excuse for Picard and Kirk to fight together. I know they had that. They knew that's what they wanted, and so I'm sure what it was
And it had to be
they were
old-fashioned fisticuffs
they were
Kirk.
writing to fill the
'Cause
situation
it's Kirk. It's got to
versus
be. Mhm.
they were writing to fill the situation versus writing for the sake of the story.
And with
It
Kirk, it's got to be an old-fashioned punch-out.
Yeah, I don't think that was handled well. It doesn't make sense. And that becomes a lot of the main problem is this understanding of why did you choose to do this? Why? And I'm not even talking the writers, just character-wise. Why did you choose to do this? Why are you acting this way? When Geordi came back, are you telling me the number of times Geordi has been kidnapped and brainwashed and you didn't check his visor? You
Yep,
didn't look to see if he was
exactly.
transmitting? None
Exactly.
of that. This is just bad. This is where it goes into bad writing.
And also, it does extend along the problem the show had with Dr. Crusher.
Hmm.
He's barely in the movie and does almost nothing.
And,
Roy,
and except
Roy
for
actually,
being a comedy punching bag.
yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Now Troy is interesting because Troy usually gets the short end of the stick. This time, though, which she still doesn't get a lot, she does get to actually counsel Picard
Mhm.
in a very effective way, I think. Now, putting her at the helm,
Bad
when
idea.
they're crash landing, that's a bad idea.
Hey, Will, that's okay. She crashed a ship. They would never put her at the helm again, right?
Mm. Yep. So yeah, I mean things like that, they just don't quite
Well,
don't
anyway,
quite add up for me.
the ending could have been worse. Kirk could have been shot in the back.
That's right, the original script.
That
And
was
I have a feeling, based on things Malcolm McDowell has said, is that he only took the job because he wanted to basically get the finger to Star Trek fans by killing Kirk.
In fact, they actually shot.
He didn't
That-
like the
that-
screenplay. He thought it was terrible.
They actually did film it that way originally,
Yeah.
where Thorne shot Kirk in the back, and it didn't go well with a test audience. So just a couple of months before the movie opened, they went back and reshot that whole climactic fight scene
Mhm.
and made Kirk's death more heroic.
It does get a little bit excessive though, the camera shots of all the bolts breaking. That does get a little excessive.
Anyway, but in going back to what I was saying earlier about what didn't sit well with Brandon Braga about the Nexus scene, I think I have an idea of what the issue is. Picard's wife and kids in the Nexus are characters that we've never seen before.
That's true.
Who are these people? Now, if Beverly Crusher
Yeah, if Dr.
had
Crusher had
been-
been his wife, that would have
had
been
been Picard's wife in the Nexus, then I think that would have given Nexus a little more meaning.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that.
Also, I don't. Also, that scene also had to be reshot.
Oh, did it?
Yeah. So, and I think Renee, nephew, was added for the reshoots.
Okay, interesting.
So I think that may have been an attempt to solve the problem that I just addressed. That you have this wife and
There
kid,
needs to be a personal connection there, yeah.
but then Renee, who I should point out is pretty much the only kid that Picard really got along with.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
He's there because he's recently died,
It-
but now he's there.
Also
And-
on the next gen, he's played by the same actor. Played young Picard in Rascals.
Yeah, but this is another thing
This
I
is a
don't
different
like.
actor though.
Yeah, that's one thing I don't like about the movie. I had already seen Family, the episode,
Mhm.
when I went to see Generations, and I knew who Renee was, Picard's nephew. But then getting to the Nexus, there's a different actor
A
playing
different
now,
actor.
and who's
Yeah.
this guy? So that kind of messed it up for me.
Yeah, so there is a lot of weakness in this film. I think that overall, just given its nostalgic power for me, I think I can excuse a lot of those because I think this movie will always mean something very special to me, I think.
Mhm.
So I guess now we sort of talk really about how this fits into larger Star Trek canon.
So there's some good stuff here.
And
There are
there's some good connections here.
So this was the first movie for Tim Russ. Tim Russ.
That's right. That's right.
Tim Russ, this is not his first appearance in Star Trek though, because Tim Russ played in an episode of
Starship
Next
Mine.
Generation.
Starship
Yes,
Mine.
Starship Mine. But little known, big known fact, Tim Russ was originally up for the part of Geordie LaForge before he lost it to LeVar Burton. So it's really great to see him aboard the Enterprise B. And then
Tuvok's human cousin apparently.
Yes, 2 years later, he is Tuvok. And
He's
I
Tuvok.
often think too that in my world, this is my brain at work here. In my brain, he was on the Excelsior as an ensign, and then temporarily got transferred. And that guy, it was just a mistake. There should be ears. That should be Tuvok. I love the idea.
That's your headcanon.
It's my headcanon, and I'll keep it.
Well, in official canon, Tuvok was on the Excelsior.
Yeah.
No, I know. That's what I'm saying is the connection. He was on the Excelsior and then transferred temporarily to the Enterprise B.
And something happened to his ears.
Yeah.
But
transporter accident.
Voyager actually started running a couple of months after Generations opened. So it was a rapid turnaround between seeing Tim Russ in the movie and Tim Russ on Voyager.
It's really quick.
And then, of
It's
course,
very quick.
Demora Sulu. There's a big
Mhm.
connection right there.
Absolutely.
That was actually originally supposed to be Sulu himself.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Because
Well-
originally, the Enterprise B sequence was supposed to feature all of the original series
All
characters.
cast, yeah.
Well, the main 7 anyway.
The main 7, yes.
And Sulu was supposed to be the helmsman and everything.
That
But-
would have been a little bit weird considering he's the captain, but
Exactly. George Takei objected to us
Yeah.
this for that very reason. And so they end up rewriting the character as Demora Sulu.
so we get Demora Sulu. That's kind of cool.
Which sets us canon, and then this idea is reiterated in Star Trek Beyond when we see the daughter.
Slightly
and-
different, but yes.
Slightly different, but I know different universe, but that is also Demora
Yeah,
Sulu.
we also see the little Demora.
So that
But
continues.
anyway,
Um,
they eventually rewrote the scenes so that it was just Kirk, Spock, and McCoy
Mhm.
in the Enterprise B scenes. But DeForest Kelly, his health was failing and he wasn't
yeah,
able to get the necessary
he passed
help
away right after, or not long after.
a few years after.
2 years.
But he wasn't able to get the necessary health insurance to be able to do the movie. Leonard Nimoy felt there were script problems,
Yeah.
so they both had to bow out.
Mhm.
And
I don't
so,
necessarily disagree with Leonard.
Spock's lines were given to Scotty, and McCoy's lines were given to Chekhov. And one of McCoy's lines was rewritten in Russian to customize it for Chekhov.
Mhm. Yes. Also, the Duras sisters.
Yes, and
That's
that
a
was
big connection right there.
that was a nice connection. Actually, I just wish there was more motivation in there other than
little bit,
profit
yeah.
and power. That's what it was. Is like, we
Retaking the
want the
Klingon
weapon.
Empire. Yeah.
Yeah, I wish there was a little more, especially with the connection they have with Picard.
And also the Romulans, which don't get brought up in this movie that much.
Yeah, real quickly, and
Which
then
is a
that's
shame
it.
because Scylla could have been in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they
And-
could have done that.
There's another connection that could have happened but didn't.
Hmm.
In the Nexus, apparently the writers originally intended to the woman that Kirk is living with that he plans to propose to.
Antonio.
Antonio.
Originally that was going to be Carol Marcus,
Oh, okay. No, that actually would have been really interesting.
but the studio
The
heads
timeline wouldn't have worked, though.
the studio heads told them no.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I mean, the Duras, it's interesting because they were, of course, in several episodes of Next Gen.
And one episode of Deep Space
And
Nine.
yes, and they were in what was it? Redemption, Part 1 and 2, with their brother or their nephew that was trying to become the
It
chancellor.
was their brother, I believe, because he's the son of Duras.
Well, Duras was their brother.
Duras was their father.
They wouldn't have lined up.
The Duras sisters, were they the sisters of Duras?
They were
himself?
sisters of Duras.
I thought they were daughters to Duras.
No, his father was the one who betrayed them at Kinnemer. He had a different name. I think his name was Terrell.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Duras' son,
Okay.
Terrell.
Well, the point is, they're related to this guy.
Yeah, they're related. And they're up to their old tricks of trying to, cause more chaos. And, and it's interesting to see them again.
Mhm.
The movie was the first time I'd ever seen them.
Really.
Until later when I watched Redemption.
I on the other hand had already seen Redemption when I saw the movie.
Okay.
I knew who the
Interesting.
I knew.
Also,
Yeah.
Also a big connection. It's just now we know the fate of Captain Kirk. You know, that was never really addressed.
Oh, one thing I meant to mention earlier
mhm.
that's potentially controversial is that I've also another Star Trek novel that I've read is The Return.
Yes.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I
yeah,
was-
I was going to mention that Avenger and the Return. They're a pair. The Return first. I read this. I like this idea. Let me tell you how much I love this idea. That would have made a better movie to me.
Mm.
It's not canon, not even beta canon. It's considered the Shatnerverse. But this idea is that
Before
go ahead.
before going into it, I should point out that I think Shatner only wrote the story outline and what
Oh,
to
ghostwritten.
interviews and everything, but
Ghostwritten.
hired other writers to actually write the full novel
Oh, okay.
based on his plot
Interesting.
outline.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Like George
because I
Lucas
remember
and
other
Alan Dean
writers
Foster.
because I remember other writers also being credited, and I think that was the dynamic.
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
stories,
Yeah. Mhm.
the story was still Shatner's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Avenger, I know that its sequel, Avenger, was written solely by Shatner, 100%. That I do know. But the basic plot of this is that the Borg form an alliance with the Romulans, and they invade Viridian 3 during the reclamation of the Enterprise D,
Oh,
where they
interesting.
take Kirk's body and
Oh,
using Borg
They
technology,
do like a Neelix on it.
they resurrect
Like
him.
Neelix bringing back to life the Borg technology.
Yeah, they resurrect him and
Interesting.
using the Romulans, because remember, Romulans and Vulcans biologically are not so dissimilar.
They're the same. Yeah.
They're pretty much the same, yeah. They manage to reclaim Kirk's Katra, but they implant false memories into Kirk, wanting to basically destabilize and destroy the Federation from
So
within.
basically another Shinzon.
Yeah.
And
Slightly different.
and more specifically, they brainwash him into trying to assassinate Picard.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, they do a Geordie LaForge on him. Mhm.
I mean, there's some cool stuff in there. There really is. They end up on the Defiant, with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and like it's kind of cool actually.
Yeah. I also think that as far as connection, the destruction of the Enterprise D leads us, of course, to the Enterprise E,
Mm-hmm.
which is a gorgeous ship, if you ask me.
Yes, the Sovereign.
Also, we get Worf later transfers to DS9. We get a little bit more insight into Guinan's species. We learn that the Borg destroyed their homeworld. We also learn that Kirk was thinking about quitting Starfleet at one point.
And if you do the math, it would have been shortly before the events of the Wrath of Khan.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
But yeah, so there is a lot of connection
Uh-huh.
in this movie to other stuff.
Malcolm McDowell is actually the uncle, the real life uncle biologically of Alexander Siddig.
Alexander Siddig.
Julian Bashir.
Dr. Bashir. Dr. Bashir.
That connection. That's a nice little touch.
Those are our connections.
Yes. Oh, and the gorilla joke. How do we forget the gorilla joke connecting all the way back to Encounter at Farpoint?
Even though it wasn't actually in Encounter at Farpoint.
Wasn't it though?
I don't think it was.
No, I don't think it was.
But the fact that they mentioned Farpoint,
But they haven't even met the
itself the
Ferengi
connection.
yet, so.
I might have
Interesting
saw
they said
maybe an
Ferengi.
extended or maybe a deleted scene somewhere, because I remember, and maybe I'm Mandela
Maybe it's
affecting this
Mandela
stuff,
effect, yeah.
but I remember them sitting on the bridge and somebody told the tail end of the joke the way Data did and laughed, and Data didn't understand it. And I remembered that
Maybe
when they
it's
mentioned
one of
that.
those Mandela effect things.
Yeah, it might have been a
Or
deleted
maybe you were in the
scene or-
Nexus. Maybe you were in the Nexus.
Anyway, but still referring back to Farpoint and that 7-year journey.
Yeah, that's an interesting little connection.
Yes.
So this sort of brings us, I think, to our final thoughts. Unless there's anything else we want to add.
Favorite a moment or quote?
Oh yes, favorite moments or quotes. Yes. Scott,
I
I'll let you go first on that one.
think I'm going to have to say that my favorite moment and my favorite scene in the movie would have to be Kirk's death scene, because
Interesting.
he's just lying there covered in blood, and he asks, "Did we do it? Did we make
Do we make a difference?
Picard says, "Oh yes, we made a difference." Kirk says, "Least I could do for the captain of the Enterprise. It's been fun."
It's a beautiful scene.
Oh my.
Yeah. I mean, it is
Yes.
a beautiful farewell. It really is.
Yeah. That's a scene it's just so powerful that it shows that Kirk is now finally journeying to the undiscovered country.
And he's willing to accept it.
Yeah.
Which is something he tried to be avoiding up to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Another for me, my favorite scene, well, the crash of the saucer is really cool. And the drinks from Frocus 3 is pretty funny. My favorite scene, I think, is when Picard tells Troy what happened to his family. Because that's Picard as a character, emotionally opening up, which he doesn't do very often.
Mhm.
That's Patrick Stewart delivering an A-level performance. That's Deanna Troy finally getting to be a counselor. And also getting to learn a little bit about Picard's family history. The Martian colonies, about Picard who thought it Trafalgar.
Mhm.
That is really a beautiful scene. And that's my favorite scene in the movie.
I gotta go with the first conversation between Soren and Picard in 10 Forward.
Forward, yeah.
Time is the fire in which we burn, and right now my time is running out. We leave so many things unfinished in our lives. I'm sure you understand. And for that moment, yeah, he understands.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
connectivity between
And-
the two is awesome.
And Malcolm McDowell really is a terrific actor.
Mhm.
And he
Anyway.
really does deliver in this movie.
Another thing I liked about this movie is, as I said earlier, how it's structured as puzzles.
Yes.
Puzzles, because they don't tell the audience right away what Soren's plan is. They don't tell the audience right away what it is that Picard finds out.
Exactly.
That's distraught. They just tease it. They keep the audience guessing. They keep the audience. They give the audience.
The crew members guessing too.
Yeah, they keep the they keep the audience and the crew members wondering what's going on, and they give you the ability to try to figure it. They give you enough time to try to figure out for yourself what could be happening before they put all the pieces together. And this happens several times throughout the movie. And they also establish patterns, the destruction of the Amargosa star. So we see just how destructive this can be.
Exactly.
And then they tell us it could happen again at Viridian 3, only this time 230 million people are going to die.
Yeah, because Viridian 4 has got a population.
Yeah. And and also another thing is we get to see Soren's plan play out in full, and everyone dies. But the payoff to that is that Picard and Kirk now have the opportunity to go back.
They do it again.
Set things right.
Yeah, they do kind of the Kylo Ren and the Rise of Skywalker, where they get a chance to replay the same events, only what if we'd made a different choice? So, anyhow, I mean, yeah, it is a movie of, it's a mixed bag of a movie. And that, I think, really brings us to our final thoughts. Well, Scott, why don't you go first?
Final thoughts. I concur that it's not the best movie in the series, but I would definitely rank it, well, definitely ahead of Insurrection and Nemesis, and certainly light years ahead of The Final Frontier. I'm not sure if I would rank it higher than the motion picture. Maybe
that's a tough one.
Coin flip, I guess. But
they're on a similar level.
But this is a movie I really enjoy watching. I'd like to think that it's one of the better Star Trek films out there. And I really enjoy the music from this one.
Yes, Dennis McCarthy's music is gorgeous.
But yeah.
All right. Captain, I'll let you go and then I'll go.
I think this is a hastily written film. I'm gonna be honest, it feels that way to me. Go ahead.
Can I interject really quick?
Sure.
They actually had well over a year to write this. It wasn't hastily written. But you know what was hastily written was All Good Things. Same writing team.
Interesting that All Good Things turned out so good.
Yeah, the irony is the writers themselves felt that All Good Things, despite its rushed work, was superior to Generations.
I think that really it's what feels rushed. I think this movie
Yeah, yeah, and
feels
I
rushed,
I
even though
get
they had the time.
I get that they took their time. It's just you got to understand, and I teach in real life. I teach English. I teach reading and writing, and I studied this in college.
Uh-huh.
It's a matter of a feeling that we are not given time for everything to breathe. It feels like that they've got point A, point B, point C, and we're just going to keep trucking through this and pushing. It feels rushed. It feels hastily written. We don't get time to really digest everything.
Yeah,
That is a
exactly.
kind of a problem in this film. Now, that being said, I mean, we get Data and his chip, and as frustrating as some of those scenes are, this really builds into something that is a good character arc for Data. And I love that. I love that Picard gets a little taste of what we have been talking about with Kirk. And this idea of mortality and what's important to us and life and death. And we get that. And for that aspect of it, I think it's pretty good.
The themes are very strong.
It is very strong. I wish the interaction with Kirk and Picard was better. Not that I hate it. I wish it was better. I wish there was a little bit more substance in there for it to go with it. And sorry to say, the death of Kirk is robbed just a little bit. And so this is a mixed bag. Absolutely. Would I watch it again? Yeah, I would watch it again, but it's not going to be at the top of my list by any means.
I know that for me, like I said, the nostalgia factor here is very strong. I will always love this movie because of the first time getting to see Trek on the big screen. I have seen, let me think now, 5 Trek movies on the big screen, maybe less. This is the first one. This will always stand out to me. I think that the themes are great. Some of the emotional moments really are good. The acting, for the most part, is pretty good. I think that getting to see the Enterprise B is really cool. And getting to see the final send-off of Kirk. Well, it might be divisive in terms of how they ended his life. I think that it was a fitting send-off to the previous generation. The new generation could carry the torch. And I think that on those levels, it succeeds. Does it have major faults? Yes. Will I get tired of watching it? No, I don't think so. And those are my final thoughts.
It's wonderful. All right. Well, that concludes Generations, and we are now into the era of TNG.
Oh boy.
Next month, we get into First Contact.
Yes.
I don't think we're going to have too many problems with that movie.
Yeah.
Not a problem. But before that, we have another great moment that has happened here on Random Trek. Star Trek Prodigy has ended its first season.
Yes, it has. Very well, I'd say.
And the randomizer has deemed it appropriate to give us Star Trek Prodigy as our first episode. But as happens, my randomizer does this multiple times. It also back-to-back weeks is giving us an animated film. So I think, for the sake of brevity, we might double up animated again and compare Prodigy to the animated series, which is following. Yeah. So next week, we will take a look at season 1, episode 8 of Star Trek Prodigy, Time Amok, and it's a double feature, the TOS animated series, season 1, episode 2, Yesteryear.
Oh, okay. I've heard of that one.
I really like it when the randomizer does this. It doubles us up in animated.
So next week we'll do 2 animated. Cool.
We'll do 2 animated, and I think this is a good chance because I have talked about animation through time. This is really great when we'll again get to look at an animated series.
And Prodigy, a good way to start the new year.
Prodigy. Yes, I can't wait to talk more about Star Trek Prodigy. Scott, have you watched Star Trek Prodigy at all?
Just yesterday, I watched the season finale.
Just the season finale?
Well, I've been keeping up with the show.
Okay,
I've watched every episode, and yesterday I watched the season finale, so I'm up to speed on it.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see where this show goes. But we'll talk more about Star Trek Prodigy in the next week. But I want to thank Scott Ferguson, Admiral Scott Ferguson, for coming in and talking generations with us. Scott, do you have anything you'd like to plug?
One, I'm looking for a job.
So if anyone needs an admiral for hire, Scott is great.
Admiral for hire.
I work as a statistician or data scientist, or rather, I would be, or I'm kind of doing that part-time on call right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm looking for a full-time gig. If anyone wants to hire me. I don't have a YouTube channel of my own at this time or anything, so I don't really have anything else to plug except for a request to guest star on some more of these.
I'd love to have you back on some episodes. Sounds like as a TNG guy, I'd love to have you back when we do some TNG episodes.
Absolutely.
And get your opinion. Absolutely.
Okay.
Love that. We'll keep you on down the line. And of course, Brennan will keep you whole. But Brennan, where can the people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Brennan Mystical. You can follow our podcast on YouTube at Page Turners They Were Not, which also includes Random Track. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Page_Turners_pod. You can follow me on Hive at Brennan Marr, on Instagram at Brennan Blue, and on Facebook at Brennan Marr. And of course, in all the other social groups.
And you can find me here every week on Random Trek. You can also find me on Twitch, on Twitter at Ingle1984. And you can also find me on the LGR network as a contributor every so often. And I'm trying to bring Star Trek content to the LGR world. We'll see how that goes.
Keep it up.
Yes, absolutely. But as we end every episode, Happy New Year. Be safe. Share with your family. Kapra! And live long
and prosper.
Peace and long life.